This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Forging Table. The mission of Undaunted.Life is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. At the Forging Table, you'll see a group of regular guys forging spiritual resilience by digging into God's Word, and we're welcoming all of you to come along on that journey with us. That's Jake, that's Adam, that's Zach. And Zach, you are officially fired from timer duty because we literally just talked about it and you didn't hit the button. Fired for life. You're out of here. But guys, we're not going to have too many fun and games here at the beginning because we're going to be covering for the first time in Forging Table history 3 chapters. So last week, it was the first time ever we've done 2 chapters when we covered 5 and 6, but now we're going to be hitting Genesis 7, 8, and 9. So we kind of set up the flood last week. Now we're getting full on into the flood. So Adam, how about you start us off? Genesis 7, just read the first 5 verses, please.
Genesis 7. The Lord then said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate, and also 7 pairs of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth. 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made." And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him.
So we got the birds here. So clean animals and birds would be used for sacrifice and for food. But I thought it was interesting here in verse 4 that even with all the forewarning, we got God giving them another 7 days warning. Like, hey, build this boat. Also, we're going to do another 7 days. In 7 days, I'm going to do a thing. All right. And so you can read that a lot of different ways, but it shows that there's still patience and grace in God's countenance for humanity of like, hey, giving them an additional 7 days of preparation before literally the earth is destroyed.
Did anybody else remember that it was 7 pairs of clean animals and then only 2 of unclean? Anybody catch that? 7 pairs. It says 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate.
And a pair of animals that are not clean.
Right. I have a theory that I have not read this before on why that is, but what about provisions for all of them? What about food and substance? You know, they're on the ark for almost a year. Did they eat any of these animals, you think?
Well, so going back to Genesis 6, verse 21, also take with you every sort of food that is eaten and store it up, and it shall serve as food for you and for them. So we don't get any indication here that, because if they ate anything that wasn't birds on the ark, then that wipes out a species.
Yeah.
Or a phylum or whatever we decide.
It doesn't if there's 7 pairs of them.
Right, so I'm saying anything other than birds. So you're saying, do you think they may have eaten some of the birds?
No, I think that they were vegetarians for a year. Is pretty much what I would gather.
Well, doesn't it?
All the animals or the humans?
Oh, I'm saying
both?
humans were. Yeah, I don't know.
And animals.
So you're talking about the carnivores.
Because it says they took 7 pairs of clean animals, of which clean animals are what they would typically eat. You would not eat the unclean animals. So why would you take 6 extra pairs of the clean?
But they're making provisions. I mean, they were making provisions, I think, for the animals that also would be meat-eating animals. So I think that they would be making provisions for those prior to, so... Yeah, I'm not giving them a live animal maybe, but I am giving them like, here's this preserved meat.
Aren't we going to read about this later? Because maybe I'm way off here, but I thought we were all vegetarians until they land and God says, now you can eat animals, but you can't eat their blood and animals are going to fear you. I mean, at one point I'm sitting there thinking, are all these barbarians that are evil continually just vegetarians, which is kind of funny to think about. But are we saying that we think at this point that they're eating flesh? Because my understanding was that hasn't occurred yet.
I had not considered that. Now,
what you're referring to is in 9, verse 3, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I give you the green plants, I give you everything. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. And so that gets into the Levitical, the dietary restrictions and things like that. But I don't know that necessarily says that there was no eating of animals before then.
Yeah, I don't know. I read a couple different versions, and it seemed to indicate
maybe
vegetarian.
Well, maybe not among Noah and his family. I mean, maybe under everyone else, maybe they were eating meat.
Bloody raw meat.
Mm-hmm. Could have. No reason not to.
At any point, does it say that Noah was to make sacrifices while they were on the ark? Because that could
He
be
made one as soon as they got off.
Yes.
When they got off, yeah.
So that could have been preparatory for the eventual sacrifice after 378 days or whatever, however long they were hanging out on the boat. Okay, well, hey, let's keep this going. Let's actually get into the actual flood. So, Zach, in your best big boy voice, if you can do verses 6 through 24, so finish up Genesis 7.
You know, they were clothing themselves, meaning they were. Sorry, buddy. So they were killing things.
Well, so initially
previously.
they didn't. Adam and Eve didn't kill. God provided.
Agreed, but
the
then
animals.
there's all this lineage between that point and this point.
Right.
And they're not walking around naked with fig leaves. So I assume they're killing things to clothe themselves, and likely that leads to consumption. I don't know, but
I haven't found it, but I think they had to have been used for some purpose.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was for consumption or like I didn't consider clothing or for some of the other animals, but they took 7 pairs of clean for some reason.
Yep.
Why would you need those extra 6 pairs? 'Cause
Well, and also, go ahead.
if for the unclean animals 2 was enough, why for the clean do you need 14? It's not to propagate the species after they land.
Well, and also on the food
Why?
thing, like why would the human body be able to break down the nutrition of meat if we were not meant to have meat? Because I've had people say, "Hey, look, if you go back to the garden, we were never meant to consume animals." And it's like, well, we can't eat wood and sustain off of like wood, but there are animals that can eat wood, or like what do the panda bears eat, like bamboo or whatever. Like we can't, subsist on bamboo. So why would we now? Like, was that another miracle? Like we didn't have the bellies that could process meat, and then all of a sudden, God snaps his fingers, and humanoids or Homo sapiens are able to process meat, and we're all of a sudden carnivorous.
I always pictured Cain as a meat eater. Maybe he wasn't. I don't know why, but in my head, I'd always assumed like he was kind of a
Does he
barbarian.
eat jerky as he's murdering people?
Exactly.
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe there's provision for that because afterwards they do have to repopulate. But it also clearly states that after this point, that's when animals fear human beings, and prior to that, it was different. So there were a lot of things that were different.
I think
live in harmony.
my main point is that for clean, there's 7. For unclean, there's 2. So if there's 2 pigs on the boat, and those 2 pigs are the unclean pigs, and that is able to continue the pig line after this is over, you don't need 7. You don't need 7 clean animals. Those additional are for some other purpose.
Sacrifice right after.
Yeah, is this the first mention of a clean animal in Scripture? Because I can't think of the first few chapters. I don't know that there was a delineation. There was a talk about there's
the naming of the animals,
right?
But there wasn't a delineation of clean and not
versus
clean.
unclean. And so the other thing I was starting to think about is like, okay, well, what sort of cadence of we have seen animal sacrifice in the Bible prior to this, because didn't Cain offer a sacrifice to God, but it was I think
not pleasing and not his best.
So, and I think that was an animal because he was a shepherd. And okay, so anyways, started thinking like, okay, well, maybe this 7 are there because there's some sort of regular cadence for sacrifice related to those clean animals that Noah was to keep while he was on the ark.
Well, Genesis 4, we see Abel brought the firstborn of his flock. This is verse 4. And of the fat portion, the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. And so there's no description because Cain wasn't working with animals, Abel was.
Right.
Okay. Sorry.
And so, because Cain was a worker of the ground, so he would have brought some sort of grain or vegetable or something like that. And so,
backwards.
Yeah, so even from the beginning, we see that God is, preferential towards people that eat meat. So, guys, if you're vegans or vegetarians out there, do you want to be like Cain or you want to be like Abel? Like, let's just start there.
But
start a discussion there.
But I do think the other thing that's kind of interesting there, as far as the 7 number, being the perfect number, but also just this concept of that shedding of blood requires, that essentially the cleansing of sin requires the shedding of blood, and God just meted out the wrath on everyone, meted out his wrath with the flood on everyone. And he's got these 7 animals that are clean on board. It does not say that Noah and his family were sinless.
Oh no.
It says they were blameless, though.
Blameless, but not sinless.
Well, that's when we get back to a discussion about, what was it? Elijah and Enoch?
Enoch.
Yeah, and Enoch was described as
Walking.
So he's walking with God, but then you have Noah was described as blameless, but neither one of them could be described as sinless. But why categorically did Enoch and Elijah not Elijah not have to experience earthly death? Why were they just taken up? Well, guys, we have made it 10 minutes in, and we are 5 verses into 3 chapters. But yeah, keep this going.
We need to move forward. But have we considered that maybe Noah was a trophy hunter and he needed these animals so that he could put them on the wall and admire them while they're on the boat?
Is that why your office is the way that it is?
It is.
Is that
probably.
why?
Maybe he's just like me, and he's like, that one's not big enough. I need another one with a bigger rack right next to
I can't get from the doorway to your office to your desk chair without bumping into a black bear
like
and
a
an
maze.
oryx, and it's a bit of an issue.
Let's continue.
All right, let's keep this going. So, Zach, if it's okay with you this time, do you want to read verses 6 through 24? Okay, good.
6 through 24?
Yeah, read through the end of the verse, or into chapter 7, please.
Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came upon the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood, of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds and of everything that creeps on the ground. 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah, as God had commanded Noah. After 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all of the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened, and the rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons with him entered the ark, they and every beast according to its kind, and all livestock according to their kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, and every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. The flood continued 40 days on earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep, and all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land, in whose nostrils was the breath of life, died. He blotted out everything that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left and those who were with him in the ark, and the waters prevailed on the earth for 150 days.
So considering our discussion that we had before we started recording this, I may have made a mistake saying we're going to do chapters 7, 8, and 9, but we're going to do what we can here because obviously this is the flood. There's a lot that could be discussed here, and categorically there's a lot of different ways to go. So is the description of the flood literal or non-literal? That's one. How does this relate to the other epic stories of cataclysmic worldwide floods that we see across multiple cultures, across multiple times, Epic of Gilgamesh, those types of things? And then how does that affect timelines of how we discover things? Because people will talk about the Epic of Gilgamesh being, hundreds of years predating the first description of Genesis, but also inherent in that we're going on estimated timelines of when these things were written down and on what particular tablets, because I think the Epic of Gilgamesh was discovered and written down on tablets, right? Stone tablets. And so there's a lot of interesting things about the flood. Maybe just preemptively to preempt our discussion of the flood, are we all in agreement? And if we're not, then let's start there. Are we all in agreement that how we view the flood does not affect the salvific nature of the understanding of the gospel, meaning that in order for us to have salvation, we need to put our faith in the propitiation of our sin debt and the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross and, repent and be baptized? Like, are we all on the same page there? Or is our understanding of the flood tied directly to whether or not we can be saved?
No, I don't think it's a salvation issue.
Non-salvific?
Agree.
Non-salvific?
Non-salvific.
Why the hesitation?
Well,
because I'm a non-salvific as well, but I'm like without hesitation. So you hesitate a little bit.
I would say one thing when I got to the point studying the flood where I just kind of came to a conclusion, I believe I have to embrace that there's some element of miracle for this to have occurred that I can't scientifically understand. Maybe somebody can, I can't. But what it does show is the seriousness of sin and how God responds to that, which has a salvific component to it, sort of. So sin, warning, consequence, and then grace is kind of what's followed in that. And this was, basically the largest scale event that we've read in the Bible until the next one that's coming, because it was the entire earth of God literally wiping everything out because sin is so serious. And so embracing that reality is really fascinating. And what that kind of led me down, a very short version, is just how critical moral agency is, and sort of the fundamental reality that we live in. Like, God is so clear that the way that you behave morally is extremely important, to the point that it has these consequences in real life and real world. And you could extrapolate that from your leadership in the household and the ripples through your community and society. But one little thing I did that I thought was kind of interesting is I had it pull some information through time. And if you take this example of sin, warning, consequence, and grace, you have the fall, right? Which is, like, as an example, disobedience by eating the fruit. God commands Adam and Eve not to eat, expulsion from Eden and the introduction of death, and then grace through the promise of redemption. Well, that same thing goes all the way through the flood. It goes through Sodom and Gomorrah. It goes through Pharaoh. It goes through Israel in the wilderness, the kingdom of Israel and Judah, Peter's denial, and then eventually to the cross of Christ. And in every one of those examples, as you guys know, it goes through the consequence, which the person that had the bad behavior got the consequence until you get to Christ. And obviously it's, the humanity's sin. John the Baptist and Jesus warn about this. Jesus takes humanity's punishment on himself, and then there's universal grace and salvation for all who believe as a result. So the one thing I would just say from the flood story, like I talked to you about the last episode, is just, for me, deepening that understanding of how serious sin is, because I do believe this happened in reality in the past in some way, and God was so serious about it that he killed literally everything except for this family, which comes back to how important it is for you to lead your family at home.
So with all that in mind, I would say that we would, for the most part, agree with that summary and that narrative that you went into. Then we get into the literal, I didn't mean to say that, but like the discussion of whether this was literal or mythological, whether that's even important, which we've already kind of discussed. But then, you guys were discussing a little bit, and Adam, you kind of dug into the Epic of Gilgamesh and like how that relates to all this. And guys, YouTube and Google and ChatGPT, and like you start digging into flood myths, and I use the term myth not meaning like, oh, it definitely didn't happen. Like that's just a category of how things are written down and described. But obviously Christians, see the Bible as, the actual inerrant word of God. And so you have to take the biblical account of the flood seriously, but then they just automatically say, well, the Epic of Gilgamesh has to just be mythology at that point. But Adam, go ahead and kind of give us a sense of what you went down.
So when I looked into the Epic of Gilgamesh, some of the interesting things about the similarities with Noah's Ark is there's a divine warning of a coming flood. There's instructions to build an ark. There's preservation of life, family and animals, sending out of birds, both the dove and the raven, to check for dry land, and the ark resting on a mountain after the flood. There's also another myth called the Akkadian mythology, which is a Babylonian tale. Same thing. It also has a divine warning of the flood, instructions for building a boat, preservation of life, and a sacrifice after the flood. There's multiple other stories. We were talking about even Native American stories.
Yeah.
And so
Jay, go ahead and just give that list real quick that you gave, and then Adam, keep your thought there.
So it spans the world here. So we'll start in North America. You have the Pawnee tribe, the Incas.
And these are groups of people that have some sort of a flood myth that hits a lot of these different things that Adam was just saying.
Pawnee tribe, Incas, Mayans, Greeks, the Norse, the Sumerians, the Maasai, which is in southern Africa, the Altaik, which is near China and Russia, Miatso near Korea and Japan, Unambai, which is on the Australian continent, Hawaiian, and Fiji. All of them have a flood story, and most of them have a story of a favored family who built a huge boat and brought with them animals.
So on that note, there's so much consistency about this flood story. Something happened. You would not have this level of consistency across so many cultures without coming to the conclusion that something catastrophic happened that multiple cultures decided to write about. So the question is, how did all the stories get so aligned? How are they so consistent? Why are there so many things in Scripture that are replicated in the Epic of Gilgamesh or in the Akkadian mythology? So it starts taking you down the road of which one was written first, which one came first, because it would be difficult for all of them to be so similar in if they didn't somehow share knowledge with each other. So something to be aware of as we look at this is we start looking at the chronology based on today's knowledge and today's thought. Right now, most people attribute the biblical account somewhere around 1500 to 1600 BC, from what I can tell. The Epic of Gilgamesh appears to be earlier than that at 2100 BC, but let's talk about that for a second. That's based on all of the information that I read, and that's based on what we have now. We don't know if there's other tablets out there that we don't have yet. We don't know if there were tablets before this. This has just happened to be what we found. There was one large tablet that had the Epic of Gilgamesh in, dated approximately 2100 BC. One other important thing that I'll mention is we didn't have anything in writing until the Sumerians figured it out themselves in around 2100 BC, and then that slowly started making its way across the continent, and then eventually we started writing Genesis and some other things. Before that, the Jews had a significant oral tradition. Right. Oral tradition was a big thing there. So they didn't need the written word because oral was just as good as written word then. So an argument could be made that if Genesis was really the first account of the flood and the true account of the flood for many, many, many years before the Epic of Gilgamesh was written, it could have been an oral tradition from the Jews that moved its way east towards Samaria. The Sumerians listened to it. The Sumerians heard it. The Sumerians happened to be the first one to write it down, but they weren't the first ones that came up with the idea. Mm-hmm. There's no way to know definitively that I'm aware of, but it logically points to how that could be explained because it's something we need to be aware of. If you go out and you start researching this, most of the information you're going to find seems to point that based on what we have now, that the Epic of Gilgamesh was potentially written before Genesis was written down.
And so one thing that I think is very interesting that I've even just, while we were talking in between and just some thoughts that like you kind of helped me coalesce this a little bit, is even when we see the gospel accounts, there are corrupted gospel accounts, right? So, I mean, there's the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Philip, Gospel of Mary, Gospel of Judas. There's some that have been attributed to Matthias and Bartholomew and different people and like that. And these are non-canonical gospels for some reason or another. And it would make sense that they are corrupted accounts. And so it would also make sense that there could be other accounts of the flood story that significantly predate the writing down of the Genesis accounts to a certain group of people that was an oral culture for a long time, and then it becomes written down at some point, but that the other things are just corrupted versions of the same story. You could also fast forward past the Gospels to the invention of Islam, and you have, what was it, to where it's the sacrifice, which son was taken up to be sacrificed, that breaks down to whether or not you believe in a Judeo-Christian ethic or in an Islamic ethic, right? And so I think that there's a difference to where it's like, okay, people have their story, but both stories can't be true, right? Because this is saying it was this son, and this one's saying it's the other son. It can't be both, right? It has to be one or the other.
There is that aspect of it, but I also would say, like, you start looking at some of the Gospels, and you see one story, and certain facts and circumstances are presented in like the book of Matthew, and then you look at the book of John, and it's not all the same information, and maybe some people might say it's an inconsistency. But I think when you start talking about if everything read word for word, it would seem rehearsed. It would be like, okay, we've all got together, we're going to come to get the same story, we're going to all write it down, we're going to all make sure it matches up word for word. And there's a reason that whenever you give testimony in court, if there's two people who are saying the exact same thing, it's less trusted by juries than it would be that if the major facts and circumstances that are being said on the stand, that those are the same, but there's details that are different.
Right, the minor details.
Right. And so when you look at fact patterns, it's important that the fact that the large facts stay the same, But everybody, just through their own experiences or whatever they think they saw, what they heard, all of that's going to have tiny tweaks, and they're going to be tiny details that are going to be different. So I say that basically to kind of highlight that there's these different cultures that all have a flood story. That's a major fact. There's different cultures that all have a family with animals who got onto a boat. That's a major fact. But they have, maybe the names are a little different. Maybe, there's a whole bunch of variations that could have occurred just based upon that people's history and experience.
Do you believe the Bible's version of it is true?
Yeah.
Okay.
True meaning literal?
Well, just think about it. Think about it for a second.
Got to be specific. Yeah.
Because according to the Bible, the progression of events is that there was a flood, and then this family hit ground, and then repopulated the earth. Mm-hmm. We're going to get to the Tower of Babel here in a little bit, right? And they were basically defying God by staying together in one cohesive group, and God said, nope, I'm going to have different languages, and I'm going to disperse you. And literally all the nations of the earth that exist today came from this group. So it's not like Indians were hanging out potentially in Oklahoma and the flood hit. They just came from this original group.
Correct.
So for me...
And that relates to Pangea as well, which is a whole different thing.
I'm almost relieved that the Bible supports this narrative, regardless of when it happened and when it was written down, because if it said something different, that would be illogical and not supportive. You know what I mean?
I think earlier you were talking about literal versus figurative, and I'm trying not to put words in your mouth, but trying to get to the point of figuring out how could this much water possibly be on it? Because we just read that it was 15 cubits higher than the highest mountain. What is Mount Everest? 23,000 feet. So 15 cubits is 20 feet. So we're talking 24,000 feet. That's 4 or 5 miles depth of. Where in the world do you come up with that much water? So what I wanted to say earlier, when I got to this point, when we're trying to figure out was it literal or figurative, I would point to the fact that there are so many stories about this across so many different cultures. Absolutely, something happened.
So it's 29,000 feet, by the way. Yeah, but yes, I think
29,000.
29,000.
To the point of Everest, though, that assumes Everest was there at the time of the flood.
So,
but all of those people would have just been hearing the story from Noah and their generations behind them, right? Because by definition, the flood occurred before that. So the whole point is that the population that came after the flood is referencing stories inside of their family tree all the way up to the origin
but
point.
who's writing the story, though? It's not Noah.
Moses wrote it down, according to
Bible tradition. And so they literally could have been passing the story down, but it still would have been post-Noah. The story would have been, but the writing down of it would have been different.
So is that the primary concern? Like a skeptic looks at this and just says, whoever wrote Gilgamesh gave him the idea, and then
that's what the skeptic would say, that Genesis took from the Epic of Gilgamesh to have some sort of a description of the flood story.
Well, there's two different skeptics, right? There's one skeptic. There's one skeptic that is, did the flood happen? Yes or no? That's on the left hand. On the right hand is which flood story is true.
Yeah, which one do we take?
I feel reasonably confident that on the first one, like clearly something happened. There's too many cultures, too many writings. Clearly, something happened. And to your point, if something happened, it had to be miraculous, because I don't think we could feasibly imagine how you could have that much water over the face of the earth. God moved. God did something.
We have this description as well, and we had this discussion when we got into dragons, when we were talking earlier in Genesis about all these different disparate cultures having depictions, like carvings into stone and drawings on caves of flying freaking lizards that breathe fire, like the most terrifying thing possible, right? It's like this enormous anaconda that breathes fire and has wings. And so it's like, but then you will have people that will use the argument there. It's like, Kyle, just because all these people have depictions of it, it doesn't mean that the animal actually existed. It's like, okay, well, how did people that are on different parts of the planet come up with the same idea of a mythical animal when they didn't even have an understanding of what myth was? All they saw was what was literally happening. And so they want to talk about that with dragons because we have no evidence of dragons, but then they don't want to say the same thing about all of the different combinations and understandings of the flood story. And so, and again, then this breaks into, because we're not going to be able to get into Pangea. We got too much ground to cover. But I remember growing up in Southwest Oklahoma, there's the Wichita Mountains, which is cute if you've ever seen them, because they're like glorified hills. And so if you can't traverse those, you probably shouldn't even be existing. But I remember going down through the Wichita Mountains with a guide and saying, well, actually, however many millions of years ago, this mountain range was higher than the Himalayas. And so Okay, well, now we're like, well, crap. Okay, we have this description of the water being above the highest peak, and we both just, oh, yeah, you mean Everest? Well, maybe not, because it was the highest that could have been done at that time. But also, when the water came up from the depths, what did that do to the Earth's crust, and what did that do to the peaks of mountains? Right? Because if you're having the waters being dispersed and tectonic plates moving to allow for the water to not only come from above, but also to come from below, what would that have done to the peaks that would have been above these tectonic plates? And my brain literally just short-circuited. I don't know what we're going to do from here. Right? But that's part of this discussion as well, which gets into it's fun to talk about and it's fun to think about, but we can't really know it. And so if we're getting super hung up on this, I think this is interesting, but man, this becomes salvific for some people depending upon where they end up landing, like on what team, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I guess I would say, and I know we won't go down the path, and that's fine, but I do want to say there is a salvation message within the story of Noah and the ark. I think it's interesting that he builds this gigantic ship, 500 feet, and there's one door, and it's not huge. There's a door. There's one door, and then you start looking throughout Scripture of other doors where the righteous were kept inside that door, and the wicked was kept outside. And so, you have the Holy of Holies in the temple. There was a curtain, but it was still only a very righteous person could go inside the Holy of Holies. Daniel inside the lion's den, going in, locked in. But then you start looking at all the different times that Jesus refers to himself almost as a door, or makes reference to it. I am the door. John 10:9. I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. Matthew 7:7. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. Revelation 3:20. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person and they with me. To me, the door of the ark is literally, it points to Jesus, in that but Jesus turned it upside down. Essentially, he's not keeping people out, he's letting people in.
Yeah, and in his parables, he has some of the examples where like the door to the party is shut. Once it's shut, you can't come in. And then he literally references Noah's time, and people were eating and drinking until all of a sudden they weren't. It's definitely a picture of the gospel, no question. I guess the last point, just to go back to that for a second. I do agree. I think ultimately from a flood perspective, there's got to be miraculous events. The distinction between the windows of heaven being open and rain is also interesting, because I'm not sure they're the same thing. It almost implies like there may be a supernatural event of water coming from above and below.
It says that Earth's crust opens up, and literally there's,
that's what I was talking about with the plate shifting and all that. Like, what would that have done?
From below?
There's
Right.
volcanic eruptions in the ocean.
But I'm saying specifically from above. It's talking about the windows of heaven being open, and then distinct from that, it's also mentioning rain. So it seems like there's this enormous divine deluge that's happening, and there's also likely a divine regression of all of this water very quickly into wherever it came from, and it doesn't seem to align with what we can measure and understand today.
Because it had to be fast and catastrophic, because there were probably other boats around that people couldn't go climb and get in those boats and be okay.
So the ark would have been the only one that could have survived such a cataclysm. So
you had to be prepped.
Jake, if you wouldn't mind, because we can keep this exact thread going while also covering chapter 8. So if you'll just go ahead and read all of chapter 8, and then we'll continue our discussion.
Oh boy. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed. The rain from the heavens was restrained, and the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated. In the 7th month, on the 7th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And the waters continued to abate until the 10th of the month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made and sent forth a raven. It went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him any more. In the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried from off the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. Then God said to Noah, "Go out from the ark, you and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by families from the ark. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, "I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease."
So we can just keep our discussion going here because obviously, we've talked about, these are literal time periods being described here. Like, okay, on this date of this far from this group and whatever. And then if you look at it and you just kind of add up the days, Noah and all, what did you say earlier? Because the one I saw was 378 days. Is that
371?
Okay, 371. So we're looking at over a year in terms of modern years, which again, if you go back to our discussion from Genesis 1 and you're talking about depends on which way you're viewing time, depends on how you view all this. But let's just keep the discussion going about Noah because, Zach, what you were kind of talking about is, and all of us have talked about this point, is there is a through point to the narrative of humanity because there are certain times when you're reading the Old Testament, you're like, what in the world does this have to do with Jesus? Because how many people have told us every single thing in the Bible points back to the cross? Every single thing. Well, I guess you could say the empty tomb points back to the empty tomb. And so you can read through the flood story and be like, what in the world is this telling us? But you go back to what I said at the end of last week's episode to where it's like, the narrative of the Noah flood story is that this is our nature. Our nature is to be violence. Our nature is to be Hamas, like those types of things. But it's not nurture because you will have people who are atheistic now that will say it's a nurture problem, not a nature problem. But we know different. So this is almost like a macro description of our sin nature and why that even leads to us needing a savior. So let's just keep the discussion going on this before we get into chapter 9.
Is there a risk in saying that? Is there a risk in talking about the distinction between nature and nurture? Does it almost seem to absolve you of responsibility in some way?
I think so.
Like I don't.
Well, the thing is there's nature and nurture as a delineation, but then there's here we go. There's choice. There's choice versus, dancing to our DNA.
Nurture.
Right? Well, no, nurture doesn't necessarily affect, it can affect choice, but we ultimately have the ability to choose whether or not we do a thing because we may be, our nurture may have pointed us in a particular direction towards a particular deleterious behavior, but we still have the choice whether or not to engage in that behavior.
Yeah. I get what you're saying. The idea that, your nature or your nurture may put you in situations. So, if you grow up in a certain area, the choices you have to make are going to be different than somebody who grows up in a different area. Still means that there's a choice. Still means that you have to choose between right and wrong. So
moral agency. It's important.
There you go.
Yeah. And again, that does, Zach, get into the wider discussion of, again, we've had this discussion at this table a lot of times about whether it's like, okay, are we wired in a way to where we can't say no to the gospel, right? Yeah, this gets into the Calvinism. No, that's what I'm bringing up. Like that's the like, because, you know, if you're strict 5-point Calvinist, it's like, no, you were predestined before time to accept the gospel, like, which again brings up okay, then we are just automatons. And some people were chosen automatons and some people were non-chosen automatons, which actually plays in to the dancing to our DNA discussion, which comes from the 4 horsemen of new atheism, right? And so it just gets muddled pretty quick.
I mean, it seems to me, I mean, we've been through that multiple times, but they're both true simultaneously. And the Bible explicitly says that there's going to be mystery and we're not going to understand all of it. I mean, like just glancing at what Wiersbe says here for just a second, he's talking about the faith of Noah, which you see in action because he's obediently building and, you know, doing all these things. But that doesn't automatically imply that his family is going to be saved. They also made the decision to watch what was happening and then get onto the boat with him, implying that they had their own faith, which was saving in its nature as well. And so, you know, God didn't necessarily force that, but he pre-understood it. So, yeah. Next. That's a deep hole.
Okay.
We already got plenty of holes.
Yeah, for whatever reason, I feel like we need to have some sort of because, you know, there are guys listening to this right now, and I mean, I've talked to guys recently that do exactly what we say, which is make sure you read this chapter before you listen to our discussion next week, because I don't want to color anyone's understanding of Scripture based on our discussion, because again, as I told all of you guys from the beginning, and Zach, you're the only OG at the table, but from the beginning of the idea of the forging table is like, this is not a performance. Right? This is not, hey, we are 4 theologians that have this all figured out. Now we're just going to like compare who has a better description of the thing. We're figuring this out. We're asking questions we don't know. We're all hooked up to the internet so we can like search and kind of figure things out from here. But if you had to in this moment, right, with no gradations, I think gradations are stupid. It's black and white. Is Noah's version of the flood literally true as in it happened? Like where would you stake your claim right now, just to kind of give everyone an idea of where we're at? Jake?
Literally true.
Literally true, literally happened. Adam?
Literally true.
Literally true, literally happened. Zach?
Same.
Okay, I'm the same as well. So I didn't know that was going to happen. I didn't know where you guys were going to land. But I do think that is an encouraging note for guys listening or watching this right now, is all of us brought up different things that would be challenges to the point of view that we actually hold. Which what that points to is intellectual honesty.
Yeah.
Because if you hold to a position and when anyone starts challenging that position, you just start screaming or going la 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 la, or like hitting a bullhorn or something like that, you are expressing that you are intellectually dishonest, because you will not engage with content that is contrary or that challenges your point of view. And we've been just marinating in that for the last couple of weeks, and in between tapings of this, we're sitting here being like, well, I want to make sure, but like this is where my faith would lead me. So that's encouraging for me, at least.
Yeah, I guess I would say it's one of those. I can't remember who was debating Christopher Hitchens, but they brought up the idea like, do you ever doubt your position as an atheist? And he said no. And the person who asked the question was literally like, see, and I have wrestled with doubt over my spirituality my entire life, which is why I have had to ask myself questions about what I believe, and then research and dig and read the Scripture, and then read it again, and then research and dig. And the fact that you would not doubt anything, it doesn't mean that you've come to this conclusion intellectually. It means that you've been propagandized, that essentially you've been told what to think, told what to believe, and you just believe it. That does not lead towards any sort of spiritual growth, because all growth comes with doubt.
I don't know how Hitchens went out. I know that he recorded himself at the very end saying, I am not going to have a deathbed conversion. If you've heard that, it's wrong, and so forth. Have no clue.
Yeah.
But in my experience, the worse and more challenging things get, and you can just imagine yourself degrading and questioning, the less places you have to run. And so where you end up is in some faith position that you can't quite explain anyway, because you'll find yourself praying to God. And going back to this example, specifically, one thing that came to mind is, I don't believe that Noah was in discourse with God continuously or regularly. I think that God was choosing when and how to engage with him, and then providing the resources and direction. And he was having to walk by faith through the circumstances. And it was an extended period of time. I mean, think through how much he would have been going through mentally and having to just walk through that faith position. And then how long it took to finally reseed and waiting for the birds and all that sort of thing. So I guess one conclusion I would draw just for myself is it's just another example of God may put you through circumstances that are protracted. And you may find that you're in such a dark place that you don't know where to go. But when you're in that foxhole, you'll find that you probably are praying anyway.
Yeah.
So it's really an interesting concept to think about. But God's going to put you through those circumstances. You got to walk with him. And then ultimately, that worked out for
sure. Let's keep we got to keep this moving along. So you can keep talking if you'd like, but you have to, the words have to come out of your face are Genesis 9 verses 1-6. So
I just read.
Oh, I know, but I didn't want to interrupt you and then, pass it on to somebody else.
And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that its blood. And for your lifeblood, I will require a reckoning. From every beast, I will require it, and from man. From his fellow man, I will require a reckoning for the life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image.
Now I feel bad for interrupting you. Do you remember what you were going to say before I made you read?
Well, I was going to say the flood story and the receding, it makes me think of Job. Job got a flood of horrible things that happened to him. Lost his livelihood, lost his livestock, lost his children. Ironically kept his wife. I don't know if you guys have heard that whole thing. Yeah. Wife did not die. Wife stayed alive, which just makes you wonder how awful she might have been. But I think all of us could probably point to a point in our lives where we just felt like we were just deluged with nothing but bad news. And also to a point where we had no other choice but to turn to God and just cling to him and wait for the waters to recede. I think Job is a good example of that, where it's just like he never abandoned God. He always was looking to him and praising him and going, he may not know why they're happening to him, but in the end, he was rewarded even more than he ever thought he could be. So it was God who restored Job, and it's God who's going to restore you too.
Right. Getting into this first part of Genesis 9, a lot of Christians, I won't say a lot, I have been made aware of Christians that are anti-death penalty. And when they say they're anti-capital punishment and they have to explain their position, the only things that they can seem to come up with are arguments that are made by people that were already anti to begin with. And so they will make arguments like, well, it's not really a deterrent anyway. There's no evidence to say that it's a deterrent. The death penalty is unjustly used against people of color more than it's used against white people. And they'll make all these arguments that break down to, somewhere between sociological and political. But for Christians, we come back to verse 6 of Genesis 9, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, and for God made man in his own image. And the thing is when you ask somebody that is anti-capital punishment, and you say, hey, well, why, if somebody, because again, in this country, we only kill people that kill people with usually some extenuating circumstances, like, okay, there was a kidnapping and then a rape and then a murder, or it's a murder of multiple people or something like that. But even then, we don't really kill a whole lot of people in this country using capital punishment. And so it becomes unjust when those people are on death row for 20, 30, 40 years in some cases, being kept alive by the taxpayer. But the whole reason why this is a thing is because we are image bearers of God. Because if I shoot, a newt or something like that, some random animal, like, again, we have to give an account for how we've taken dominion over creation, and obviously like torturing animals, it would not be a good thing. That would be a sinful thing. But like, a lion that takes out a zebra, like that lion's not going to be put on trial. He's not going to be arrested for taking them out. But for humans, there's a different standard because of sentience and because of whose image we carry. And so I don't know how much y'all have ran into that, because like I just grew up in a family where, the death penalty is the thing. Like if you kill people, we're going to kill you back. But then all of a sudden you get these like, bleeding heart, arguments from people as to why we shouldn't do that. And it just seems to run aground pretty easy.
I just avoid those people.
You just keep those people out of your life entirely.
Right.
That makes things easier.
I mean, that's Catholic faith. I mean,
Keeping people out of your life?
no,
Is that what you meant?
no, the anti-death penalty. I mean, the Catholic faith is anti-death penalty, just for the whole sanctity of life argument.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Yeah, the difference being
Especially
that
with
if
their history, it seems like that'd be counterintuitive.
I know it would
What
seem
history are you referring
counterintuitive.
to?
whatever do you mean?
Something in that, something around that 1500 time.
Yeah, well, Catholics
The sword's out of the water.
Catholics don't seem to take the Bible seriously anyway. So of course they would kind of go through this part and not really care.
But I guess, I mean, I'm actually one that's not in favor of the death penalty myself, but that primarily relates just to the idea that I don't know that I trust the government to met this out and actually do the right thing in all cases. I mean, I think Kamala Harris actually had something with that when she was AG in California, where she was holding out. Tulsi Gabbard said it in the debate, like there was somebody on death row, and Harris literally withheld evidence that would have
Exonerated.
Thank you. I was looking for the word exonerated them. And I'm just going, okay, justice is the main point, not conviction. But also when you're dealing with humanity in this role, I don't know that just for the idea that somehow a conviction is going to be favorable to you for your career and get you more power and more influence and more money. I think some people who are put in that position are not well intended. So that's generally why I am. It's not that I'm over here going like, well, the Bible is against the death penalty. It's like, no, it's pretty clear it's for it. I just don't know that we're really good at it.
And so to be clear, you are pro capital punishment. You just think we suck at it.
Yeah, I spank my kids.
Right. So, well, that's corporal. That's corporal, not capital.
Fine. All right.
Yeah, you're not killing your kids.
Children.
For the record,
How many kids
guys.
did you have that lived?
How many kids you down to now?
There's some vipers in diapers, man.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the thing, because then this also gets into, because Catholics will be like on the pro-life debate and things like that. And obviously Catholics have been incredible on the abortion debate and the most consistent of any group, probably arguably there's ever been on the pro-abortion debate. But to people that are that will say to a pro-lifer, wait, so you're pro-capital punishment though, so you can't be pro-life. I was like, are you saying that an innocent baby inside the womb is the same as a capital murderer?
Yeah.
Because that's essentially what you're saying, because that person that's inside the womb is not yet making choices in the world, right? Because they are currently contained geographically inside of the womb of their mother. Whereas somebody that is outside, that is condemned to death, that is someone that has chosen to kill people. Because in this country, we don't kill people for anything other than capital murder, right? Like there's not capital rape, there's not capital grand theft auto or anything like that.
I think they just changed that, didn't they?
How far have you gone down the rabbit hole of our understanding of what life actually is?
No, I haven't.
Are you really going to pull that out like at the very end of the
I'm gonna give you
you better have
3
a
minutes.
quick.
Okay.
Zach literally pulls out,
Good.
what is life?
Well, hopefully you can tell us in the next few minutes.
I'm going to throw out some resources. So if you haven't seen it, Dr. James Tour is a really fascinating guy from Rice University. He's been in some of Metaxas's books, but I've listened to a lot of what he has to say. He's so accomplished as a scientist that he's no longer worried about getting funding. So he's kind of above reproach. And he is this extreme prolific scientist in the world of nanotechnology. I think I have that right. Anyway, he's going to bat with all the major scientists right now about we don't understand what life is, period. Literally, we can't define it. Like NASA has some definitions, but when you see or think about seeing a person who has just passed away, what left? What's no longer there? And when you reverse that back to creation, when you take two organic things, what caused that thing to be alive? There was some experiments where they thought they replicated it, but they haven't. So the point being, you could go down that. It's pretty fascinating. John Lennox is spending a lot of time in his new book, 2084, the revised version, which you all ignore me about when I brought it up. You should read it. It's amazing. But they're talking about the difference between what we're trying to create and AI versus what life actually is. And so it brings it all the way back to the point where it's literally something we don't understand that comes from God, the breath of life, and it's sacred.
Well, that actually does relate to what we, even in Genesis 8 in verse 1, it's talking about, gosh, let me find it. And God made wind blow over the earth, and that's the Ruach, right? That's the spirit.
Yeah.
And so what was breathed into Adam?
Yep.
The Ruach, like the spirit, like what was hovering over the deep, like it does get into that discussion as well. We are running short on time here, so we are going to have to kind of keep going with all this. But Adam, if you would read Genesis 9, 7 through 17. Yeah, 7 through 17.
Genesis 9, verses 7. As for you, be fruitful and increase in number, multiply on earth and increase upon it. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, This is the sign of the covenant I am making between you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on earth. So God said to Noah, This is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on the earth.
So that's the Noahic covenant that we see. That's the first covenant that God made with man. And then we have the next ones that come up are the Abrahamic covenant that we see in Genesis 17, the priestly covenant in Numbers 25, the Davidic covenant in 2 Samuel 23, and then the new covenant in Jeremiah 32. One thing I wanted to point out quickly on this before we wrap up our discussion of 7, 8, and 9 with the ending of 9 is what was sent, the rainbow. Okay, the rainbow, how many stripes does it have? Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, blue, indigo, green, blue, indigo, violet. And then I've made this point before, but it's worth making again. Whatever God creates, Satan counterfeits. And so when we have the pride flag, most people just say, oh, that's the rainbow flag. No, the pride flag has 6 stripes on it. Okay, not 7. If you go back to the reason for it, it's because there was a lack of a certain color dye when that particular flag was designed at the beginning. I think it even had like 8 stripes at the beginning. It never had 7. And so that's an interesting thing that we see. And I think it's in Ezekiel somewhere. I'd have to get the reference right. But we see descriptions and depictions of God in the heavenly places being surrounded by rainbows. And so if you think about it, Satan and, a third of his legion were cast out of heaven and, in some way or form rule over earth. And so what is Satan surrounding himself with here but a counterfeit rainbow, right? So you have people that are waving the rainbow, not the rainbow flag, but the pride flag or the pride progress flag or things like that. And it's a falsehood. It's a counterfeit. Let's go ahead and finish up with the reading of Genesis 9, and then we'll wrap up all of our commentary on these 3 chapters. So Zach, if you will hit Noah's descendants. So go ahead and do 18 through the end of chapter 9, which is verse 28.
The sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These 3 were the sons of Noah, and from these the people of the whole earth were dispersed. Noah began to be a man of the soil, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his 2 brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned backward, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers. He also said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died.
Okay, let's spike the football once and for all in this ham versus turkey debate. Okay, not only is ham unclean, but it's also freaking gay because it saw.
Wait a minute.
Whoa.
It did.
Whoa.
It
Gay.
saw ham comes in, sees Noah, goes, hey guys, come look at Dad. Ham.
He doesn't.
Wait. As a
Unclean.
card-carrying member of Team Ham, I'm going to make it worse. I'm going to take your argument and I'm going to make it worse. There are schools of thought that think that Ham sodomized Noah. That he didn't just say, hey, come take a look, but that he took advantage of his father's nakedness, because when you get into, verse 24? And when he saw what his youngest son had done to him, that is an active verb tense that is used. So you don't do something to somebody by pointing at them and saying, hey, everybody come and look. But that something went a little bit further. So when I was digging into different commentaries, there are certain schools of thought that say it wasn't like, hey, everybody come here because this is going to be really embarrassing when he sobers up, but that he actually sodomized him when he was
So
drunk.
that would be literally gay.
Literal gayness in the anus. All the things. Sorry, probably shouldn't have said that, but here we're all at the end. People probably tuned us out at that point. But yeah, it gets worse. But you know what? I'm still in Team Ham, not this version, not capital H
evil,
ham.
dirty ham.
This is capital H ham, right? That's it's just different, right? You know, right? It's different.
yeah,
It's different, Zach.
Yeah.
Just the next time you take a big juicy
Don't
bite,
Don't ruin it for me.
on.
Don't.
Come on.
you know what you're going to think about.
Well, now, yeah. So, but good thing we don't have Ham waiting for us downstairs to eat. But any parting thoughts on Genesis 7, 8, and 9? It wasn't a bad, going through 3 chapters of the Bible. I could have paced it a little bit better. But closing thoughts. Don't talk about Pangea, and don't open up like big philosophical things.
I do want to say,
What's our place in the universe, really?
Yeah, I do want to say, like, something interesting on the rainbow. There is a translation for that actually translates to a war bow. And it's interesting that the Lord's bow is now aimed at the heavens as an indicator of the covenant, that essentially he's literally set it down.
I saw that as well.
And so it's no longer aimed at us. It's aimed at the heavens because he set it down.
But if you've ever accidentally shot an arrow into the air, not going to say I've done it. It does come down eventually. It doesn't just keep going. So you're just hoping it doesn't come down where it's not supposed to. But any closing thoughts, Adam?
No, sir.
Nope.
Zach? All right, guys, well, we're just going to have to leave it there, but come back here next week where we are going to dig into Genesis 10 and 11. So we're going to kind of take it down just a notch there, only doing 10 and 11, so make sure you read both those and come prepared. But before we let you guys go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. Do not forget that we have a forging table starter set that we have through the Crossway website. It is 5 books. They're amazing books, and you can get the entire set at a 50% discount. Go to the show notes, and you can check all that out as well. And then also the Logos Bible software. Several of us have worked with that software before, and it is the best Bible software in existence, but don't use it at full price. Use that as a discount. We do have a code that is in our show notes that you guys can check out. It's actually a link. Click that link and you can go through it. And also, guys, we are a donation-based ministry. So if you're wondering how do we afford the lights, the tables, the microphones, and how am I able to pay these guys for their labor and things like that, it's just one of those things, guys. They're not paid. They do this out of the goodness of their own hearts. But guys, we are a donation-based ministry. So it's guys just like you that want to see other men like you have content like this in their ear holes, and the way that we're able to do that is by having you guys partner with us financially. So go to that link in the show notes and hop on board. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.